Catholic Church teaches that homosexuality is a tendency towards an intrinsic moral evil. It is an objective disorder.
If being a gay person is to be objectively disordered, then how is it that God is calling so many gay people to priesthood?
Homosexual activity is a disordered sexual inclination which is essentially self-indulgent.
I'm sure part of the panic surrounding issues about homosexuality is the fear that the Church's whole sexual teaching is going to be unraveled.
Homosexuality is a time bomb ticking in the Church, and it's going to explode, and I think it may explode soon.
For centuries, the world's most powerful church has put very strict limits on when human beings are allowed to have sex.
God has given us the gift of sexuality, first of all for the mutual support of husband and wife, because that's where these acts should be confined to within marriage, and secondly that those sexual gifts should always be open to the procreation of children, in other words to the transmission of new life, and those two really are inseparable.
Catholic teaching frowns on homosexual acts and any activity like artificial birth control which denies the chance of children. Vatican officials point out that a gay orientation can be a slippery slope to evil acts, because sex, which is not open to reproduction, must be seen as an objective disorder. That's all pretty tough if you're queer and a practicing Catholic as I am. I spent 2 years as a Dominican friar and had to stop training for the priesthood when I fell in love with another man. Being described as disordered was, and still is, a little hard to handle. I still respect my church and believe in the Gospels. Yet the more one scratches the surface of this subject of homosexuality in Catholicism, the more one senses it isn't all quite what it seems.
For all of the Catholic Church's negative stance on homosexuality, it's becoming increasingly clear that, in many respects, the priesthood itself is a closeted gay profession. And this is a priesthood which is racked with guilt, lies, secrecy, and suffering. Not exactly a healthy climate, either for the priests themselves or for the parishioners that they're trying to serve.
This is a story that the Vatican would prefer to be left untold. It is the Catholic Church's taboo, for the sexual identity of its priesthood is a time bomb which threatens to explode the entire edifice of its teaching on sex. In the autumn of 1992, a Catholic teenager went to Rome to fulfill his childhood dreams. He wanted to train to be a priest at the English College, just a 15-minute walk from the Vatican. For years he studied philosophy and scripture and aspired to live a celibate life. All was going according to plan for Chris Higgins, until another student appeared on the scene. The two began a relationship.
Well, I very quickly went from feeling very special because I had, someone who was more than a best friend, someone that I could be open and honest with, and then feeling completely desperate and depressed by the fact that I wasn't allowed to have this because it went against my vocation to be a priest, it went against my gift of celibacy, it went against everything I publicly was saying that I was.
When you realise that somebody feels the same way about you that you feel about them, it's a great thing. But for us being in a Catholic seminary, it was also a complete disaster.
Dennis found being sexually active and a trainee priest, like me, an impossible contradiction. He told Chris that he had to leave.
And the day Dennis left, I went to the airport with him. I can remember us both being very upset. And it just all seemed so final and so unfair.
Chris stayed on. He was made a priest in Sheffield in 1999. But he and Dennis were finding it hard to break off their relationship.
Dennis had come to the ordination, which was a fantastic celebration. It was a fantastic day. In fact, Dennis sang the Litany of Saints during the ordination.
Yet within days of becoming a priest, Chris's mind was in torment. His feelings for Dennis grew ever stronger. For 5 months he was at war with himself. He felt that his life was a sham.
I was telling lies about what was happening in my private life. I couldn't, like the the couples that I would, lead up to their marriage day. I couldn't, like them, say, I'm in a relationship as well. I want to live with someone. I could keep that up for so long, but when it becomes so confused that you don't actually know who you are, and the only way out of that is to say, actually, this is who I am. And it was driving me mad, and it was tearing me apart.
Chris could bear it no longer. The Catholic Church lost a talented minister who left to become a probation officer, while Dennis, who could also have been a priest, is now a hospital doctor. Their departure only serves to deepen the Church's growing manpower crisis in the parishes. Their story echoed my own experience, and yet I know it's far from a one-off. The sexual identity of the Catholic priesthood is one of the untold stories, but it's beginning to take shape in the American Midwest. Here, nestling among all the drive-in burger bars, is St. Mary's Seminary. Its leader says his church must confront an unwelcome truth. Large numbers of student priests are attracted to other men.
In spite of the fact that it might be awkward and painful, and it might lead us down paths we'd rather not take, I think it's the only thing to do, is to open the can of worms.
Father Cousins has written Changing Face of the Priesthood, a controversial text which examines what he calls the priest's crisis of soul. Most eyebrow-raising is a chapter which focuses on sexual identity. It quotes a number of surveys which suggest that 50% or more of the priesthood is of homosexual orientation. If accurate, that would mean that half of America's 50,000 clergy are homosexual. The priesthood is emerging as a gay profession.
I think there is a consensus that this is the case today, and other seminary personnel, I think, will attest to that. I did not mean to imply that the significant number of gay seminarians and gay priests means that they're not leading a celibate life. I'm just asking, what does this mean? It might mean hardly anything at all. Personally, I think it means something.
Father Cousins is adamant that he's talking about mature homosexual men who are attracted to other adults. To confuse gay orientation with the recent cases of paedophilia, which have dogged the church, would not only be unjust, but inaccurate.
I think it's important to state that in terms of clerical misconduct with children, what is clinically called pedophilia, that orientation is not a factor here. Orientation does not in itself make a priest a more likely candidate for misconduct with minors.
The rector has been under fire from fellow clerics for even daring to raise the question of gay priests. But he's stuck to his guns, and he insists that his church is riddled with contradiction.
I think there is a great deal of resistance to addressing the issue as candidly as we might. Issues surface such as, if being a gay person is to be objectively disordered, then how is it that God is calling so many gay people to priesthood? And I think the church doesn't want to get into that area.
He emphasizes the distinction between a gay orientation and being sexually active. Even allowing for that, I know from my own time as a friar that this subject is definitely taboo. And Father Cousins wasn't exactly the toast of the seminary for letting us in with our cameras.
Message received 9:17 p.m.
Mark, this is Donald calling. I've just had some seminarians come to see me quite anxious about the filming of the Mass tomorrow. I want to honor their concern, so I'm calling to ask you not to film the Mass tomorrow. As I said, I need to put the best interests of St. Mary's first.
The vast majority of candidates for priesthood are men of deep faith who act out of sincerity to a calling from God. But I've often wondered why there are so many gay men. There are many gays in the caring professions, and I guess it's possible that the image of a male god may also be a factor. And if you're uneasy about being gay, the prospect of a life without sex in the priesthood can be a most respectable escape from all those awkward questions about getting married.
If the young man is confused about his sexual identity, the anxiety that's concomitant with that can be diffused if he says, well, I'm simply going to enter the seminary. And so if he's not attracted to young girls, he can interpret that as, I think I have the charism of celibacy. So if you're going to be celibate, if you're going to be a loyal Christian, why not move into religious life or the seminary?
That means the law of celibacy, so favored by the Pope, may be one of the reasons that explains why the priesthood has traditionally drawn in so many gay men. But there are other factors. I'm sure it's often the all-male culture and a certain homoeroticism of seminary life that may also allow the gay student priest, repressed or not, to feel at home in his surroundings.
I have a friend who said he lived in the gay neighborhood in Chicago, and he says, you can't go out and buy frozen peas without getting cruised. And that struck me, because I remember seminarians saying, you can't do anything in the seminary without it provoking a kind of erotic friction in the air. Anything, washing chalices, arranging the linens at Mass, anything can take on a kind of erotic cast. When I'm describing Catholic seminaries as communities, as spaces that are queer spaces, that are highly charged with erotic energy, I get exactly split reactions. Many gay seminarians and some straight seminarians nod vigorously and say, yes, it was exactly like that. And others, some closeted gay seminarians and other straight seminarians, either say, that's deeply offensive, scandalous, and anti-Catholic, or some of them say, I don't know what you're talking about.
Donald Cousins has only said what many have known privately for a long time. The genie is out of the bottle. But, say the skeptics, things are different in the United States, so perhaps his observations have no wider significance for the Church in general. What better way to check all this out than to get an assessment from one of the Catholic Church's mainstream institutions? This is St John's Seminary at Wonersh in Surrey, where men have trained for the priesthood for more than a century. Father Kevin Haggerty is the man who's been in charge here for the last 6 years.
This whole question of orientation that Cousins touches on in the book, it's pretty uncharted territory for the Church, isn't it?
It's uncharted in the sense that we haven't got a complete picture, but I think it would be true to say at the moment that the charts are being made, in some places faster than others. You're talking about something which traditionally raises at least amber lights, if not red lights. It's something which we have caution, there are taboos involved, and very natural fears.
Father Haggerty warns against defining a person exclusively by his orientation. He encourages openness and self-acceptance in his students, and is therefore well placed to agree with many of the findings of his counterpart from the United States.
The Cousins book is a significant book, I think. There is some evidence that there is a greater number of people who are gay in the priesthood than there are in the general population.
You've been rector here for 6 years. Do you have any way of making an estimation yourself, roughly?
My estimate would be that a reasonable proportion of men for priesthood, going for priesthood, are perhaps gay.
When I was in a religious order, I found that having a large number of gay men all under one roof posed challenges. Straight men got very uneasy and often felt they were in a minority. And it's also easy for the community to get segregated into gays and straights and form divisive cliques, a development which Father Haggerty says one must guard against.
Amen. There obviously are things we need to look at. Firstly, I need to say that in the same way as there's no one type of heterosexual, there's no one type of homosexual, so it wouldn't be right to in any way tag all people who may be gay as having the particular propensities. That would be wrong and unjust. But it would seem to me that subcultures are a danger. They're things we have to be aware of because they're inappropriate for priesthood anyway. They are divisive and ultimately unjust, and in fact contrary to the openness required of a priest. And Lord, his name shall be added unto you. Alleluia, alleluia.
Father Kevin isn't the only one who's concerned about the potential dangers of a gay subculture emerging in seminary life. This is a text I've obtained from another rector who refers to the potential destructive influences of camp behaviour. By camp, he says, I don't mean the humour and manner of Graham Norton or Julian Clary. I mean the exclusive behaviour, language and overtly sexual humour which can exclude other people and which can be offensive. I will be extremely anxious about men who refer to each other by girls' names.
It's just when I think of the names and then I see the people and why they were called that. The students called Shirl, Big Shirl, Daisy, Phyllis, Mavis. One student was known as Welsh Bag. I can remember one spiritual conference addressed the issue that we shouldn't use bovine, canine, feline or feminine adjectives to describe men in the college. So every now and again the reins were pulled in and we were told, you mustn't do this. And it lasted for about a week and then they were all back at it again.
Camping it up sounds like innocent fun. But those who have worked extensively with gay clergy say it can also reflect a deep personal unease about sexuality. This can adversely affect both the priest himself and his parishioners.
Priests who fail to reconcile their sexuality and their spirituality often take refuge or seek to somehow redeem themselves through almost obsessive attention to detail. It's a cliche to talk about people as liturgy queens, I think, but and it's not so much evident these days, but if you're a Catholic, you are aware of priests who are absolutely obsessed with the length of the altar cloth or their own kind of appearance in the liturgy and getting everything exactly right, or priests who are absolutely hard in their attitude towards other people's moral struggles and other people's sins and peccadillos. And often those, I think, are priests who are struggling with their own demons, you might say, concerning sexuality.
So what does the Pope and his senior curia make of all this? We were rather hoping to find out, but it was perhaps inevitable that the Vatican remained tight-lipped. But behind the walls, the signs are that this taboo is now nervously under discussion. In February this year, a senior member of the Curia, Archbishop Bertoni, issued the following statement to the Catholic News Service. He said, "It's self-evident that seminaries should refuse admittance to men with a strong homosexual temptation. Although the homosexual inclination is not sinful in itself," he says, "it evokes moral concern because it's a strong temptation to actions that are always in themselves evil." It's the irony of all ironies. A church which is short of priests relies on men whose sexuality it treats with suspicion. When I became a friar, no one asked me if I was gay. Yet today, if you apply for the priesthood, they will ask you searching questions about your sexual preferences. Of course, this could all be academic, since all priests are meant to be celibate, whether they're gay or straight. However, new evidence of the lives of some gay priests is now prompting calls for the rule of celibacy to be re-examined. The Catholic Church teaches that the celibacy of its clergy is a charism, a gift from God. The unmarried state and sexual abstinence, it argues, are a powerful symbol of selfless giving based on Christ's own life. Most people assume that priests have had to be celibate since the origins of the Christian Church, but in fact that's not the case. Compulsory celibacy for clergy serving under their local bishops was only introduced in the 12th century. It reduced the risks of wives and children getting their hands on church property and gave superiors greater flexibility to move their priests from parish to parish. Celibacy and priesthood don't necessarily go hand in hand. A small number of exceptions are allowed, like the recent ordination of married Anglican vicars, who have converted to the Church of Rome. But most priests, gay or straight, are meant to be celibate. However, the Church trains men in all-male communities, a small housekeeping detail that only invites trouble. Back in the early 90s in Rome, Chris Higgins from Sheffield was one of a number of young men who started their priestly studies at the English College.
I realised pretty soon after arriving in Rome that I wasn't the only gay man in seminary. In fact, the whole seminary experience was very different to how I'd expected it to be. On one particular Trinity Sunday, some students had more to drink than others and had become very tactile and physical with each other in the refectory. Later on that day, noises were heard coming from one of the students' rooms. And there were obviously two people having sex. It became even more obvious when his neighbour, to cover the noise of what was happening in the room, put on a Take That CD on full volume.
Whatever I said, whatever I did, I didn't mean it. I just want you back for good.
Which got the attention of most of the students in the college. They all came down to the corridor to tell him to turn the music down, which he did. And the noises of two people having sex were still coming from the student's room.
Sometimes your discussion of the issues wouldn't be healthy, and sometimes you'd end up, doing things that you weren't supposed to do, going to places you weren't supposed to go, and all of that could happen because the whole issue was being dealt with underground, in secret. There were a lot of students that I knew who would identify as gay men. There were a smaller proportion of students who certainly were going to clubs, going to parks where, it was known that gay men met at night.
Hardly what one might expect of future priests aspiring to celibacy. So did those who engaged in what the Vatican calls disordered acts feel remorse? No, says Chris Higgins. Some fellow students defined celibacy as not falling in love. One-night stands were still permitted.
It could be in a bush, in a park, in the middle of Rome, but you were still being celibate in the sense that your heart belonged to God, your heart belonged to the priesthood and the church, and what you did with your body was just flesh.
This is not a definition of celibate living likely to hold much sway with superiors. And there were often other mind games at play which sounded familiar from my time as a trainee priest, like some students using church teaching to hide their sexuality.
The people who were most publicly anti-homosexuality were often the most gay students. A lot of the most vociferous defenders of the church teaching on homosexuality were people I knew to be homosexual. Now, that's not to say that they were practicing, but I knew them to have feelings for other men and to identify as gay men.
In the absence of scientific surveys, one cannot know with certainty whether gay priests are more likely to break their promises of celibacy than their straight counterparts. Many maintain strong, chaste friendships with other men that are not expressed sexually. But if a gay priest is going to have an affair, it's much easier for him to get away with it.
If the priest is seen in the company of either another priest or a man out socially, dinner, theater, movie, concert, isn't it nice? Father's always with another priest or with a male friend. If a priest is having dinner or going to the theater with a woman friend, no matter how good the relationship and healthy it might be, let that happen more than a few times and there are some raised eyebrows. It is destabilizing for the straight priest to look at the situation and say, I think it's more challenging for me to be celibate than it is for my brother priest who is gay. The ground rules are the same for all of us.
Discussion about the sexual lives of gay clergy has traditionally been kept under wraps. Even as little as 5 years ago, you wouldn't dream of a man like this, Marco Politi, a seasoned Vatican watcher, writing a book about the real-life confessions of priests in Catholic Italy.
This book of mine has paved the way in Italy, where this was such a strong taboo, to a new openness. There were priests, for instance, who answered in interviews about the problem that other priests or monsignors had died with AIDS because they had sexual intercourse.
People living here in the Vatican?
People living in Rome and also in other parts of Italy. There was an interview of a Swiss guard who is now retired and is working in a flower shop in Rome.
Yes, I know.
Who said, yes, when I was serving as a Swiss guard, I knew that within the Vatican there was homosexuality.
The Vatican official in question is Franz Steiner. For 2 years he worked alongside his colleagues maintaining Vatican security. In a recent magazine interview, he lifted the lid on the undercover world of the Vatican's sexual identity. I understood that it was possible to be gay in the very heart of the church at all levels, he wrote. You just have to keep quiet about it.
It is a huge irony that these people might be gay themselves and preaching anti-gay material and constructing the Vatican's anti-gay rhetoric. But, you know, that's an irony that's not unique to the Roman Catholic Church.
In the months spent researching this program, I discovered that trying to talk about all this in Catholic circles is rather like showing garlic to a vampire.
Scusa signore, parla italiano? Facciamo un programma per la televisione inglese, soggetto un po' delicato, omosessualità nella Chiesa Cattolica. No? Non vuol parlare con me? Oh, mi dispiace.
Not really. Not something we're particularly interested in.
Are you all in seminary or?
Oh yeah. Yes.
Right. Are there openly gay seminarians in the place where you study for priesthood?
I don't know any.
Right.
No, I don't know any either.
Ha sentito parlare di questo libro? Si tratta di un prete gay.
Sì, ma non ci faccio tempo per questo.
Okay. Grazie, arrivederci. It's about the subject of homosexuality in the Catholic Church. Have you...
Excuse me. No.
Have you heard of this book?
No.
No?
No.
No. Oh, okay.
Wherever you ask questions about all this in the church, it's the same old story. Up go the barriers. Sometimes Catholic leaders will go to extraordinary lengths to stifle discussion. On Merseyside, a film was being made about the predicament of a young gay priest. The screenplay writer was Jimmy McGovern. The script was finished and all the parts were cast. They were only 7 days away from the start of the shoot.
It was an arduous day, and I did this writer's workshop in a British prison, and came back after a very long day to find my answer machine full of messages. And whilst I'd been in that prison, Archbishop Warlock or his staff had phoned up everybody who owned the locations we had hired and said, have nothing to do with these people. God might work in mysterious ways, but the Catholic Church uses a fax. You know, that's what they did, faxed everybody. So all the locations fell through.
Jimmy McGovern couldn't use the very church where he was baptised and had to settle for filming all the interiors at an Anglican church in East London.
And I felt I had every right to make my film in my church. That all fell through, and we ended up busing 30 girls in communion frocks down to London in the middle of winter.
Take this, all of you, and drink from it. This is the cup of my blood, the blood of the new and everlasting covenant. It will be shed for you and for all, so that sins may be forgiven. Do this in memory of me.
We showed it at the Edinburgh Film Festival, and at the end of, we had like a question and answer session, and there was a man on my right hand side, and at the end of it all, he leaned over to me and said, "I'm a Catholic priest, I teach in a seminary, I will show this repeatedly." And I just went, "Oh, bless you."
Do you want to come back to my place?
I went to see the film Priest in an arts cinema in Wales, and I sat down in the cinema and I looked around me. And if you're a cradle Catholic like I am, you quickly learn to spot priests in mufti, and it was full of Roman Catholic priests trying not to look like priests. And I found that tremendously moving, because here was a film that was addressing the issues of their lives.
The hierarchy could comfort itself by pointing to the fact that the film was mere fiction. But this story of a priest who burns with both love of his vocation and love of another man is anchored in the deepest of realities. When I was preparing for priesthood all those years ago, I never thought I'd see the day when you could go online into gay clergy chat rooms. This is a veritable church within a church. Priests from all over the Catholic world exchanging messages with one another about their sexuality and their problems with celibacy.
But it's the whole breadth, I think, of this phenomenon which is really interesting, because there would be a temptation to think that, yes, America's a very open country. In Europe, we're used now to discussing gay issues. But here are priests from Mexico, from nearly all the South American nations. There's one in particular who's been in correspondence with me for quite some time. And he says to me, "Estamos en todos lados, tiempos, culturas y religiones." We're in all places, all times, all cultures, and in all religions. Nos mantenemos en contacto. Let's keep in touch.
Was it coincidence or providence? I don't know. Weeks after that message on the gay clergy website, the very same priest was on a UK visit and wanted to speak to me about his experience.
¿Cuántos años tenías cuando...
How old were you when you made love with a man the first time?
Fue después de ordenado.
After I was ordained. I guess I was around 30.
And what did you think about it?
Lo primero que pensé fue ciertamente...
The first thing I felt was a certain heaviness of heart. I felt guilty, sinful, and sure of eternal condemnation.
Condenación eterna. Pero fue con el tiempo que descubrí y dije...
Then, after making love a number of times, and I stress the word love, I thought two things. Where is the sin in all this?
Y lo segundo, qué cosa hermosa.
And secondly, how wonderful that God has given us this capacity to love, not simply to fornicate.
Y no solamente el de fornicar.
Have you always been celibate?
But I'm not proud of it. It's a gift from God. He gave me the gift of celibacy. He gave you certainty of vocation. Two totally different gifts.
I want both.
Now, that's being greedy.
Yo creo que el tema es, primero y principal, el
I think the key thing here is priestly celibacy. We need to change the law to make it optional, not obligatory. It shouldn't be a necessary condition of being a priest. No, you should have a choice. In that way, I could openly have a partner, which is impossible at the moment.
Get out now, Greg, while you still have your health and strength. Love who you want, when you want. Get out.
I can't get out. God wants me to be a priest. I don't think it, I don't just believe it. I know it.
Some men know all too well that celibacy and the call to priesthood don't always go hand in hand. Bernard Lynch resigned from formal ministry 2 years ago so that he could live more openly with his partner.
The Irish-born priest was a high-profile campaigner at a time when AIDS was ravaging New York's homosexual community.
He spent much of his priestly life battling with the church on behalf of lesbians and gay men, and knows many priests who flout the rules on celibacy. The church, he says, cannot continue to ignore this.
Two are not intrinsically linked, celibacy and priesthood, as we well know. So change is necessary. We all know that a lot of priests who are gay, and indeed a lot of priests who are straight, they're not celibate. So I don't believe I'm saying anything new, nor indeed am I doing anything new. I'm not unique. I suppose a theological way of interpreting what has been revealed in terms of priests' behavior is that this is the Holy Spirit saying to the institutional church, this is not my will.
But even if the celibacy rule were to go, gay priests could still not live openly with their partners because the Vatican says all homosexual acts are disordered. However, as the gay crisis gathers momentum, some of Rome's very own priests and nuns are now squaring up to their superiors in an attempt to get the church to think again. The Catholic Church is in the throes of an identity crisis. Many of its priests are gay, and some of them want to live openly with their partners. But that would mean the Vatican rethinking the law on celibacy and most of its teaching on sex. Faced with these demands, the hierarchy is more determined than ever to hold the line.
The sticking point comes, say, when it comes down to sexual genital activity, which the Church has consistently said and still says is restricted to the marital state. When we're talking about homosexuality, and particularly homosexual genital acts, we're talking about a person going in the wrong direction and therefore not achieving the purpose for which they were created, and not achieving their fulfillment and deep happiness in life.
All major religions that I know of have the heterosexual paradigm as their modus operandi in terms of a sexual ethic, because it perpetuates itself through the population cycle. And I think that's very normal. I think that's very natural. But again, an ethic that ignores and excludes 10% of the world population that are otherwise made is not human and cannot be of God.
This war of words is now forcing the Church to stress its traditions more strongly than ever. In condemning gay sex, the Vatican points to what it calls the natural order of creation. Men and women are clearly made for one another in God's plan, and their reproductive potential is proof of the Creator's sexual design.
God created man and woman so that when they come together in that deep, intimate sexual relationship in marriage, the fruit of their love is often, or can be, expressed and made real in the production of new life.
Has God somehow erred in creating a constant 5–10% of the human population as gay? I mean, he created Adam and Eve, but he also created Adam and Steve.
No, I don't think God errs at all. Again, it comes back to this question, which people will not acknowledge these ways, that there is sin in the world. It's the old problem of original sin.
Most gay clergy have traditionally remained tight-lipped, as the hierarchy have described their sexuality as seriously flawed. But revolt is now coming from the unlikeliest of quarters. Father Gordon Brown was a closeted priest for nearly 40 years. Now he has done the unthinkable and become that rare entity, an openly gay, serving clergyman standing up to the might of his superiors.
On 102.5, this is Clyde 1.
All this has come about because of controversial remarks made by Scotland's Catholic primate.
As the leader of Scotland's Catholics, Cardinal Winning, backs the retention of Section 28 and branded homosexuality a perversion.
I think I got quite angry about some of the things that were being said, both outside the church and within the church, about homosexuals, about people like myself. Things like, that homosexuals were a danger to marriage. If you're a homosexual, follows that you're a paedophile.
Father Gordon then received a phone call from a newspaper. It had received a tip-off that he was brooding. They wanted to know if he would speak out. He agonized about it for 48 hours, and then he bit the bullet. Provoked once too often, one Sunday morning, Father Gordon finally kicked down the closet door. His outburst unveiled a whole underground network of Scottish gay priests.
Last night revealed that a secret homosexual community of priests has been set up under the noses of Catholic leaders. We meet regularly, and I'm drawn to other gay men for support. We're doing a good job, but we have been forced to shelve our sexuality, and it's hard. I don't have a partner, and I lead a celibate life, but there's a major side to me that has had to be shelved.
I think I would expect, above all from the church, the compassion and the understanding of Christ for gay people in the church and outside the church too. And sometimes that hasn't been coming over all that clearly, and that was part of my anger.
It's a bit of an irony here, isn't it? If it wasn't for the words of perhaps Cardinal Winning and some of the other church authorities in the Section 28 debate, you'd still be in the closet.
I'm sure that's true. Yes, I wouldn't have done anything about it, I think, me being me.
It was a much braver act than his modesty suggests. He was the first Scottish priest openly to challenge the cardinal by coming out so publicly. If Cardinal Winning chooses to step up the war of words, he must now know he has a closet army waiting in the wings. some of the Vatican's empire, the unrelenting advance of the gay agenda is setting Catholic against Catholic and bringing open warfare to the Church. Catholicism is America's single biggest religion. To conservatives here, holding the line on homosexuality amounts to making a simple choice. Are you orthodox or are you a heretic?
Homosexual activity, yes, I believe as a Catholic that it is an abomination. The devil's intention, I'm sure, to attempt to destroy the church in some way or another. But the sexuality, the homosexuality, is a big part of it. I don't know if it's the root cause, but it's a big part of it.
This group of Catholic zealots goes to remarkable lengths to combat breaches of the faith by sexually active priests.
We have hired private investigators to do minimal amount of work because of the cost.
Private investigators?
Yes, yes.
That sounds a bit like the Ku Klux Klan.
Well, it might be looked at that, but here again, we're defending our faith.
Mr. Brady, how much do private investigators cost?
They vary from $100 to $200 an hour and on up, depending on...
It's very expensive.
It is very expensive, yes.
And people might say, this guy's on a bit of a witch hunt. Private investigators rooting out priests. What's this organization up to?
Well, when we use private investigators, it's rare, but it's sort of a last step. And we only use a private investigator. We've only done it on several occasions to verify facts.
Roman Catholic faithful have succeeded in removing a number of clergy from their posts. They explain their actions against those who practice gay sex on the grounds that they're defending Catholic orthodoxy.
What I'm basing my belief on is what the Church is teaching. And what the Church teaches is based on revelation, tradition, and Scripture.
But is the Bible as clear-cut as it seems? It does contain a handful of passages which appear to condemn same-sex acts, which some Christians say proves the issue is cut and dried.
It's in the Bible. The Bible! You read the Bible, you pervert.
But nowhere in the Bible is homosexuality discussed in the context of a committed, loving relationship, and taking the Scriptures at face value can be a dangerous game.
Slavery is justified in the Bible. Women being stoned to death is justified in the Bible. But of course, all of these are considered, to say the least, not politically correct.
And do none of these abominations!
Judge not, that you be not judged.
Lord. Homosexuality, in many Bible bingo players' minds, the last bastion of God's wrath against a section of people.
I don't suppose you listen to the Pope. Jesus said to him...
If the Church did come to change its teaching on this, you'd happily accept that?
The Church can't. I mean, I can't say I'll happily accept it because it would never happen. It will never happen.
But I'm not so sure. There's now open rebellion in the Church's ranks. Sister Janine Gramick, a Notre Dame nun, is public enemy number one in the eyes of the Vatican.
This is the book that really came under intense scrutiny from the Vatican Commission, Building Bridges.
She wrote a book challenging the Vatican's line on sex,
But, he said,
and continues her crusade at public meetings all over America.
now, of course, what he meant is, do you believe that homosexual acts are intrinsically evil? That's the teaching of the Church about homosexual activity. Do you believe what the Church teaches?
Such open questioning of the party line has induced panic. Bishops have written to Rome demanding that she cease this work. But Sister Janine is not bowing to pressure. She's even defied Cardinal Ratzinger, the Pope's senior inquisitor, who has personally demanded her silence.
I no longer believe in blind obedience, and most religious today do not believe in a blind obedience in following each and every command that is given, but a reasoned obedience that one looks at the command and asks, is it just or is there a higher command to which one must be obedient?
Her argument that a good Catholic can be fully aware of the Church's teaching on sexual matters, and yet on grounds of conscience can still dissent, is dangerously subversive to the Vatican. And trying to gag her has only backfired.
It has placed the whole issue of lesbian and gay people much higher on the Church's agenda. So this has achieved the opposite effect, I think, than what the Vatican had intended.
Rebels are now beating a path to the gates of the Vatican. Bishops and priests join in gay rallies, openly picking fights with their superiors. Some chose the Gay Pride March in Rome in July 2000 to challenge the Pope. In all my times on gay pride demos, I've never seen one being led by a Roman cleric. This was Don Vitaliano, a straight priest from southern Italy, and he wasn't alone. The gay-friendly bishop, Jacques Guyot, was banned by the Pope from addressing a conference of gay activists at a hotel near the Vatican. The Frenchman obeyed the Holy Father and did not attend. But he still came to Rome and gave an interview to the press on the hotel doorstep.
I was surprised to hear of the Pope's request, but I was happy to obey it. It's important to respect his wishes. But he has done a great service because lots of journalists are now interested in this matter. So I say, thank you to the Pope.
Shortly after the Gay Pride March, the Pope spoke publicly about his personal anger regarding the parade, which he labelled an affront to Christian values. Vatican TV filmed this speech, but we've been banned from using it.
The Pope's remarkable outburst here on the balcony of St. Peter's not only betrayed his own personal sense of bitterness against the event's organisers, it also revealed something rather more profound. Deep down, the Curia, responsible for the Church's teaching, know that this subject has the potential to destabilise the entire edifice of its sexual doctrine.
Because Catholicism teaches that all sex must be marital and be open to the possibility of procreation, anything which denies this, whether it be homosexuality or contraception, is a sin. This teaching is like a house of cards, and the mounting clamour for change could have far-reaching implications.
If I were a heterosexual person, especially a heterosexual woman, I would be exerting all of my labor on behalf of the question of homosexuality in the Church, on the theory that that question would be the one that would lead to a re-examination of sex in general and to re-examination of doctrines like the ban on artificial contraception and so on.
The Roman Catholic Church is in a mess on issues of sexuality, and it knows that it is in a mess. I'm sure part of the panic surrounding issues about homosexuality is the fear that the Church's whole sexual teaching is going to be unravelled.
The demand for a rethink on gay sex from both clergy and ordinary Catholics faces the Church with an uncomfortable question. Are there circumstances in which love alone between two committed human beings can justify a sexual relationship?
We lived in separate places, but we started kind of living together very shortly after we met because we just had a sense that we belonged to one another. And
it's kind of more a matter of picking the date than whether or not we're going to do it. It was sort of when rather than if.
This is the wedding of 47-year-old Catholic Joe McMurray and his partner of 2 years standing, 32-year-old Eric Cole. This scene is anathema to Catholic traditionalists. Joe can't declare his love for Eric and the church he was baptized into, so the two are marrying in the Metropolitan Community Church in San Francisco.
You know, so many times, as you know, that the debate rages on in the Christian tradition about whether two people of the same gender, of the same sex, can share in a marriage. And I want to say clearly to this group of people and to all who will hear this, that you are two of the most Christian men that I know. You have consistently cared for the poor ever since I have known each one of you. In fact, that's how I met you, Eric, showing up on your day off to work at Simply Supper. And Joe, of all the years that I have known you, you too have served the poor, and each of you have worked for justice in your own way. And you have been loving in your encounters, and you have honored your families. If that's not Christian, I don't know what is.
Catholic orthodoxy would be prepared to acknowledge Joe and Eric's love for one another as long as it remains platonic, but it mustn't be expressed sexually.
Homosexual genital acts, and I think it's very important to be quite specific about this.
It's very hung up on genitals, isn't it?
Well, I don't know about the church. I think society at large is, to be quite honest. I think there's an obsession with these things, but the church has clearly got to teach gospel values. One of those gospel values, again, as interpreted by the tradition of the church, is that homosexual genital acts are wrong. They are sinful.
It's notoriously true that Catholic theology, at the same time that it accuses other people of being fixated on sex, has an almost pornographic view of sexual relations so far as it focuses just on bodily organs, their relative positions, and what they do to one another. This is a very reductive view of sex, and it's not, in fact, the view of the richest part of the Catholic moral tradition. The Catholic moral tradition has always wanted to see bodies as caught up into a higher significance, caught up into their spiritual value. So I hope that what will happen is that the Church will re-examine its mechanical and reductive view of genital organs, see that they're not anything dirty or fearsome, and use that as an occasion for constructing a positive narrative about sexual life.
Guilt about sex and the human body have dogged the Christian tradition since the outset. This hang-up permeates deep into present-day culture, whether you're a believer or not. Yet this is deeply ironic, because Christianity preaches that in Jesus, God took on mortal flesh. He became incarnate, human like us in all aspects, sexuality included.
I would look to a future in which Catholic theology takes up the doctrine of the Incarnation and uses it to think the human body as a means of approach to God. So rather than despising the body and turning from it, we would look to the body as a gift that's given us in all of its capacities for returning to God, for moving closer to God, for loving God.
I say these promises, these vows from my heart to your heart. My heart is where I feel that the basis of my spirituality is, and it comes from the place where I feel God lives in me. So, from my heart, I promise to listen to you when you need it, not only with open ears, but more importantly, with an open heart and with an open mind. I promise never to tease you in public, and only when it's really necessary in private.
Sweet Eric, whenever I show your picture to someone who has not yet met you, I am always compelled to tell them this truth. You are every bit and more as beautiful on the inside as you are on the outside.
Catholicism puts any sexual expression of Joe and Eric's love on a par with artificial contraception. Since neither activity is open to procreation, both are morally evil. Yet the Church is strangely inconsistent in the way it applies its teaching.
The Church in the 20th century certainly has moved towards a much warmer view of marriages between sterile partners or marriages in which, for one reason or another, there can't be procreation. So I think that you already see in the Church's doctrine of marriage a view of sexuality that transcends reproduction. And we can use those principles, I think, as well for non-heterosexual unions.
So sexual love is allowed, it appears, in situations where procreation is impossible. It just mustn't be between members of the same sex.
Eric, with this ring, I pledge to you my love and my life.
Joe, with this ring, I pledge to you my love and my life.
And now, the two of you. By the power invested in me, by God, and by this church, I pronounce you partners in love and in life.
This was my very first time at a gay wedding, and I have to confess to feeling more than a little skeptical before the service began.
Thank you, Tinka. I'm so glad you're here.
Yet I was also told in Catholic primary school that God is love, and anyone who saw Joe and Eric making their vows would have been hard-pressed to deny God's presence in their relationship. Pledged everything today to Eric, your life, your love, your body, everything. And yet the Church, the Catholic Church, says that any physical expression of that sexuality is disordered. It isn't open to the transmission of life.
I say to that after today the same as I said it before today, and I just think that it's based on some misguided thinking and beliefs that are founded in human configuration, not in divine configuration. I don't for a minute believe that God values one type of relationship in life over another.
We were in San Francisco and we filmed a very moving ceremony between two men, Joe and Eric. Can you really say that if they affirm one another in bed, sexually, that is not a life-enhancing, affirming experience?
No, I don't think it is. Whatever their view of it may be, however they may perceive it, I would say objectively speaking it's not, and it can't be, because that's not what God intended that activity to be about. One of the effects, again, of original sin is that we tend to be blinded to the reality of life and our purpose in life. So often we can go awry, we can go in the wrong direction because we don't actually see clearly.
So you're basically saying that Joe and Eric, despite all their best intentions, are deluding themselves.
They're deceiving themselves.
I think they are, yes.
But that's a very difficult thing to say, isn't it? About two people who've given their lives to one another, who've known one another for 2 years. People would say it was cruel.
Well, I would say it's just being realistic. Again, it's not a question of condemning those two men. What I'm saying is that, objectively speaking, in the light of church teaching, they won't actually probably achieve what they think they will.
Non-Catholics among you may ask, how can gays and lesbians stay in that church? Well, it isn't easy. If you're a gay man like me, the option from my church is be celibate or be condemned as a sinner. But I'm not giving up, and I believe that for the church hierarchy, gay sexuality is now an advancing and unwelcome gift, which threatens upheaval in all areas of its life. The worm is slowly turning.
It should be possible to be a priest and have a partner, whether you're straight or gay. I feel like running out into the middle of the town square and raising a flag proclaiming the rights of all gays, Christians, Catholics, priests. This is me speaking, a Roman Catholic priest. I'm not the only one in the world. There are many of us.
Through the crisis brought about by the numbers of gay clergy and the challenges from its priests and nuns, I sense that the Church, in the long run, will have to re-examine all of its fundamentals on human sexuality. Any change by the present Pope is inconceivable, but I hope this is one delicate area that will pose both a threat and an opportunity for the next Vicar of Christ on earth.
I think that we're living in a very painful period. The Church always moves forward through crises. Crises are times when cracks appear in the Church through which the Holy Spirit pours.